Hi everyone, welcome back to The Voice of Dr. and I'm your host, Dr. Li-Meng Yan, and here is our guest, Edward Hoagland, and we will talk about Edward's new book, The Cognitive War, and why we need to know it and how we could win it. So this book now is already on the Amazon, so you can just click it and then order it if you want to read this over 300-page book. And for me, I have already ordered it, and I look forward to reading it because I have read some other materials Edward wrote before on the cognitive warfare, and it's really amazing. And that's why we have so many episodes based on this topic, because this is so important. This is so critical. And we both believe that not only us, I believe there are also some other people who are working on this field, that Americans and the Chinese need to understand the tactics of the cognitive warfare, because we are all in the environment of cognitive warfare. Our enemies, China and Russia and even North Korea, they have developed their weapons to targeting our mind. And this is not far-fetched. This is not conspiracy. They really know how to softly influence people using propaganda, using they create this kind of materials, and they create the environment, even international environment, to slowly, gradually change people's mind. And then finally, they could get their the public opinions as they expected. And that kind of strategy has been developed for over 100 years since Marxism started to rise the communism, and Lenin established the Leninist organization, and later Soviet Union, and China learned from Soviet Union, all like that, and it keeps going on. So now, until now, when we talk about it, it has already been well developed, and after decades of practice. However, most of us even don't aware of are not aware of this kind of concept. We know nothing about it. Why? Because no one talk about it publicly, loudly, and it's difficult for especially laymen to find a book to understand these basic things, to understand the significance, and to look for the way to countermeasure it. So that's why when Edward started to write this book, when I heard about that, I know this would offer a great opportunity to people to learn more about these tactics, especially it focuses on the countermeasure part, and it also combines the examples what it has happened around us already, which we are even very familiar with, to help people to understand all these strategies. And it tells us why it's so important for every America, and I want to say it's also very important for every Chinese person, since we are all in the war fighting against those evil tyrannist countries. They want to get our freedom, they want to get our democracy, they want to leave nothing to us but just enslave everyone. So Edward, in the last section, we have talked about, when I read the introduction of your book, I just feel very exciting, because it really tell the things which I want to let my audience know through different episodes. Like, for example, how Chinese government cultivate militarists from the childhood, right? And also, we've talked about how Chinese Communist Party use various of the tactics in the United States to control the Chinese people and also to influence the Americans. We're talking about a lot of that. Could you first let people know your thought, because the last episode I ended it and without having your opinions, and could you add something to the previous part first before we talk about something else?
Oh, yes, very much so. So you were spot on in talking about Xi and the education effort he has. But for those who are not familiar with history, that's exactly what Stalin and Lenin did in the Communist Party with the young Comintern's. That's exactly what Hitler did in socialist fascist Germany with the young Nazi parties and such. And that's exactly what she's doing now, is they understand the most important domain is the cognitive domain, the human mind. And so where do they start? Children. At a very early age, they compromise the children. And you see the same thing happening here in the United States today, is for the far left continues to try to then drive specific social programming, indoctrination into our children and youth, whether it's using it under the auspices of the transgender movement, climate change, or other things. All these have parallels. As Dr. Yen is exactly right, that the U.S. cannot afford to fight this battle alone. This is a global battle. And if we let our allies, Taiwan and others, alone to fight this alone, we will, as she said, be isolated. And that's not good for the United States. That's why this book, and the reason I go on the National Security Hour and these programs with Dr. Yan, is not for any personal gratification. This is because I truly believe in the freedoms and uniqueness of America, and that our presidential candidates all need to read this book. All Americans should read this book to fully understand about this war, the importance of this war, and what's actually going on. Because without that understanding, what happened to Donald Trump in 2016, 2020, and 2022 is going to happen again and again. But it's happening to all Americans, not just to one person. It's happening to all of us, as we see American parents called domestic terrorists, as we see China come into the United States with their police stations, as we see China go in and raid and rob us from our R&D, as we see China with the China flu and the fentanyl kill 1.3 million Americans now, murder 1.3 million Americans without accountability. And so they're very effective in this war. They've killed more people than we lost in World War II 3 to 4 times over. And yet there's no consequences. So if you think they're going to stop, and if you think we can compete in this war as we currently are, think again, because we need to take our heads out of our rear orifices and figure out what's the plan, what's the game plan, and how to get there. And that's what I address in this book, to start those discussions and provide some real solutions.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Edward. So the thing is, you have spent so many decades in this field, and you have seen a lot, you have know a lot. So when you start to write this book, what do you think would be the biggest obstacles for Americans to understand the cognitive war and to understand all this? I mean, why we haven't seen American professional department, maybe I say the intelligence community or the legislators, policymakers to focus on this issue, since it's so important and it happens at any moment around us in our life, from the media, from the social media, from the people you know when you start to talk about the news, share your opinions. I mean, why there is no focus on this kind of important issues yet? What is the problem?
Well, because people aren't really aware. So I'll give you a perfect example. Before President Trump entered office, after the 2016 election, I had been trying for 2 decades prior to his election, to warn Americans that our national security apparatus was being used and abused to undermine specific conservative organizations and presidencies. And then when the false dossier came out and the whole coup against President Trump came out, people started to awaken. What happened then after the China flu and the murder of over 1 million Americans? And we've seen the COVID lockdowns and the subjugation of people by the government, the people freely giving up their constitutional civil rights, unfortunately, to the government. What happened then? We found out that they were indoctrinating their children. So what people don't understand is this is a hidden war. And that's why it's very hard for people to understand what's going on, because until it hits them upside the head, they don't get it. But now you've seen multiple examples, and you can't hide it anymore. The far left, radical progressives, here and abroad, are in alliances to subjugate and undermine America, to advance their dystopian viewpoints and powers. That's why you saw the lockdowns, you see the indoctrination, not just here in the United States, but as Dr. Xi says, in China, as you see the same thing in Russia. You see the control and manipulation and the flow of information, which I speak about in the information equilibrium theory in the book. Understanding this is critical, and that's why our politicians, Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, others, they need to understand what's really going on here, because they're being played still. Our politicians think this is just normal politics. It is not. The far left has, as Dr. Yen said, spent the last 100 years refining their tactics and techniques. And now they've enhanced it with democratization of technology to make it far more effective. And we have to be aware, because we can quickly lose. We can quickly lose our freedoms and democracy. As you've seen our national security apparatus here in the US weaponized, and as you've seen how China with the BRIC and other efforts are continuing to expand their hegemony across the world.
When we talk about the hegemony, actually, this is the word the Chinese government always used to brainwash people. So I want to tell you the hegemony, this word, since my childhood, I mean, since I start to remember the things happen again and again, come in every media and everywhere. I mean, it always follows another word, American. So in Chinese Communist government's voice, this is a word always combined with America. So American hegemony, America do this bad, do that bad, American corrupted, American messed up, and also they never separate Americans and the government or the policy makers or the group of people who are working in the government or military or the federal agencies. They always mix it all together. And the funny thing is, Americans always thought communist China is your friend. I mean, maybe until very recently, after the COVID-19, when people start to understand COVID, it comes from the lab in China, developed by Chinese Communist Party to intentionally attack you. But before that, we know majority of Americans, and it was even the political correctness, that China is your friend and likes a panda. And why? Because since you established the diplomatic relationship back to 1976, at that time, China pretend to be your friend and pretend to do everything, support America. However, the fact is, according to our sources in Chinese Communist Party and according to Chinese Communist Party's their own document, from the beginning, this kind of friendship was established on the falsified scenario, which is actually at that time, if you have already read the things, when we talk about the ping pong diplomacy, when we talk about some Chinese champion, that kind of ping pong athletes, built the nice friendship with another American athlete in the games in Japan and start the beautiful friendship. It was all planned, staged. Okay, the athlete in China, he was cultivated by the communist government, selected with absolute loyalty during his childhood. And when he grew up, he had another identity. This is not even the big secret. I mean, in China, you know that this kind of people finally they get military training, very strict training. They are isolated from their families, from their childhood, and then what they have in their mind is just the party. So they were already being cultivated as special type of agents, secretly work for Chinese Communist Party. We call it the covert front, and they got the instructions from the top spy department like KGB in China. And all the things they want to do at that time is to convince Americans that we can be friends, and then get more close to America, share Americans' technology, learn from Americans, and use money funded by American taxpayers. And American people do it for all the good purposes. We really appreciate it. However, those people take the advantage. They cheat you. And why they can cheat you? Because you don't understand them. You use your thinking to try to understand them based on what you know in America. You learn from Bible, you learn from the Constitution, you know Americans in this open society with freedom, but you don't know China. You don't know that kind of the very special society which has already combined Confucianism, Chinese culture, communism, and also developed the very cunning, sophisticated rules, sophisticated this kind of principles in that society. So Edward said, I have talked a lot, and I think some very few people have touched this topic to the beginning of the relationship between Chinese Communist Party and the United States.
Well, so it's great. And the thing is, you point out is very appropriate. Now, you talk about Chinese culture being different from the United States culture. Yes, in one sense. But what you're highlighting here is what China's doing with their different Confucius institutes, their long-term plan diplomacy and stuff, is what I'm talking about, that they've refined their tactics, techniques, and strategy. They actually have a long-term strategy with a well thought out, methodically implemented plan to how to subvert America, our governance, and our institutions. You can see it. They got 150 million Americans on TikTok. That's half of the U.S. population is on TikTok, where they're bombarded with specific and influence operations by the Chinese government. And when they're not being bombarded, they're targeting information on them, their families, their children. And then, as he talked about the ping pong diplomacy, people remember Adolf Hitler and the Holocaust and the massacre and genocide against the Jewish populations. And no one would want to do deals with him after they learned that. But yet we're dealing with Xi in China, who is committing genocide against the Uyghurs, the Falun Gong, and others, but also harvesting human organs from live people to feed their leadership. And not only that, here in America, as Dr. Yin and I've talked about, they've set up illegal biological weapons labs where they have pandemic materials, literally tons of pandemic materials in warehouses inside America. And where do you think that's going to? There has to be a broader network involved here with all those supplies and stuff. So they've methodically planned this out. They're purposely using our openness. The President Biden, who's a Manchurian president, in my mind, he's been fully compromised by China. And he's bowing to China as his different leadership, John Kerry, Janet Yellen, and others do. And this is part of the cognitive war. They're leading you to believe that we just need to de-risk our efforts with China. No, we need to completely decouple from China. Any country who then commits genocide against people, harvests organs from live individuals, is a very evil regime, as Dr. Jens pointed out. And whether you're a presidential candidate, whether you're a citizen in the United States, whether you're a member of the U.S. Congress, you have to understand that the tactics and techniques the Chinese are using are also being used by others here in the United States to do the same thing. And that's why in the book I go into great detail in terms of different proposed solutions for which I hope some actions are taken, because we cannot longer afford to go on this path, or we will be subjugated before we know it. and our military weapons and kinetic vehicles and everything else will be useless.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Edward. This is a very significant warning that if not, we will be subjugated. I mean, I escaped from Hong Kong to the United States 3 years ago because I know if I stay in Hong Kong for one more day at that time, I would be disappeared. Just because I speak out the virus truth at that time. And even at that time, I was anonymously revealed the origin of COVID-19. So for this kind of vocally talking about the truth of COVID origin or talking about other CCP's darkness in public never can happen in China. So at that time in Hong Kong, I dare not to tell it in public by myself. However, when I came to US, I just realized it is very difficult at that time for Americans to understand a very basic knowledge. I mean, this is basically for every Chinese people, we know it by default that Chinese government can do anything to persecute, to harm their own citizens. This is a knowledge. I mean, although China, spent decades to use red education to brainwash people, but people still can see what happened around them, right? They can experience it. So no doubt that everyone, since you start to be the adult, you start to know the society, you will know, this society doesn't love us. This government actually just want to use us and just want, do whatever things to enslave us, and they never care about our lives or human rights. But at that time, when I came to US 3 years ago, when I tried to tell people this, I met most of Americans will ask me one question. Why could China government do it to their own citizens? I can't understand. And how could a government do it to their own people? And I received numerous attacks from mainstream media or even from the professional communities that, government can never do it to its own citizens. So Dr. Yan is far-fetched conspiracist, and China takes advantage of this kind of misunderstanding in America to try to make people believe I'm anti-China, even anti-Asian. So, Edward, have you ever seen these kind of things? I mean, I'm happy after 3 years of pandemic, it changed, but why would it happen? And what do you think? I mean, if Americans still have such ideas, how could they understand the cognitive warfare and do something to defend your freedom and your nation?
Well, so you bring out an excellent point. So when you started telling people the facts about how China actually operates, what you were seeing in the pushback from our mainstream media, who I call propaganda whores, because they push a certain propaganda. But what you see is a complete ignorance as to what's actually happening. And that's why this war is so dangerous and so deadly, because people don't understand it. They don't understand they're being subjugated. And by the time they figure it out, it's too late. So your experience coming to America, where we have freedom of speech, right, in the Constitution, you quickly found out you too then were trying to be shut down and censored and canceled, right, by people who have a constitution of freedom. But why is that? Because they bought into that propaganda that had been fed to them, spoon-fed them for years, and it continues to today. That's why you're seeing a new push for new COVID vaccines and lockdowns and masks and other things. It has nothing to do with reality and science. It has to do with subjugation and control. And that's why it's so critical when Dr. Yen and I have these discussions. We're trying to send a warning to not just all Americans, but across the globe. These same tactics and techniques are used in every different manner across the globe. It's not unique to China, and it's not unique here in the United States. And so, whether it's our critical supply chain, the illegal biolabs, the spy balloons that come across here, you see the FBI being weaponized against its own people. These are the same tactics and techniques that Stalin and Lenin used to subjugate the Soviet Union, that Mao used to subjugate across China. And now we're seeing them being used here in our own America against our own United States citizens. It is time for people to wake up before it's too late.
Yeah. So, by the way, we have talked about the illegal biolab in California in the previous episode, and I have provided evidence that behind it connects to the Ministry of Public Security and the United Front Work Department of Central Commission of CCP. And if you don't understand what it means, briefly, it means those are the same department run the notorious overseas police stations in United States and other countries. And also, our further investigation have revealed the very hidden connections between the very top-ranking CCP's bio-expert and this real owner behind the very large international commercial group, including the illegal biological labs in the United States based in China. And there is evidence already indicates this whole large commercial group is just a cover for CCP's national or even military related projects. So we will definitely let people know more in the future after we summarize and analyze all this evidence. But the thing is now, this is just a tip of the iceberg, right? As I have mentioned that how could they use the cognitive war tactics against you in the illegal biolab case? When they release those kind of infectious agents in the United States, they can simply blame the climate change. They can blame the people across the border, and they can blame you for whatever your daily life behaviors, and maybe they can say that's because you didn't. It's not a joke. They could say that you didn't receive the novel vaccines, so that's why, say, the new variant of COVID-19 come out again, and you don't have the immunity altogether. These are the things based on the way they manipulate your understanding, manipulate your mind. They weaponize the cognition, use the propaganda and other force to influence you, to cheat you. And the thing is, if you don't go to the fundamental layer of the cognitive warfare strategy, if you don't understand it, you cannot fight back because you already stay in all this kind of mysterious fog created by them. That is a fictitious world they created for you. And if you need to jump out of this kind of world, you have to understand their principles and how they build it. And then you can start to look for the way to solve this problem. And how could you get such knowledge and information? I strongly recommend you to read Edward Hoagland's new book, The Cognitive War, which you can order from Amazon. This is not an episode for marketing. I do it just because this is what I want my audience to know. I do it for free, and I do it even before I communicated with Edward. I didn't tell him until the last moment of this episode that I want to introduce his new book to my audience. It's just because as we spend a lot of time talk about unrestricted warfare, that document, and later on the developed technology tactics from the Chinese Communist Party. This book, The Cognitive War by Edward, is what you need to be the reference to fight against the CCP's strategy. And this is very critical because the invisible war has already been launched to attack all of us. I would say this is our basic defense skills to fight back, to defend our freedom. And Edward, we may only have 1 minute left. What else do you want to give our audience before we end this episode?
Well, I think you said it all, Dr. Yen. You and I come on here because we want to alarm and warn people. That's the reality. And we need to overhaul our national security apparatus here, and the book discusses that. But Dr. Yen and I will have many more segments together on this. Why? Because we want to help you understand. So please stay tuned to both our shows. Thank you, Dr. Yen, for having me again.
Thank you, Edward.